Good evening, YouTube. Good afternoon, I should say. So, just doing another follow-up for my Norinco NP34 9mm 10-round mag. Beautiful gun. Really enjoyed shooting this. So, thought I'd do another video of how to strip it right down to basically just the frame. So we're going to start by clearing it. Nothing in the mag. Out of side. Nothing in the slide either. So this is the decocker model. So it's got the decocking lever instead of safety, which is right on the front there. Brings it back nice and smooth. It's got quite the trigger pull for a 9mm. My CZ didn't have quite the trigger pull as this does. This has a heavier trigger pull. So we'll start with the slide. Lock the slide into place. There's a takedown lever there. Flip that down. Pull the slide off. Now we basically have just the frame. Pretty simple, pretty light. Now I would take apart the slide today, but I'm told that if I take this pin out, there's a pin here. I don't know how well the camera's going to show that, but there's a pin right there, and if that gets taken out, half the time it has to be replaced. It tends to break that pin. So I'm not going to do that, but I will take apart the rest of the slide. Recoil spring and recoil spring guide. And your barrel. Now really there's not much left to the slide except for basically the firing pin setup, and that's a little bit difficult to take out on these Norincos. I haven't seen too many videos of the Norincos yet. I've seen a lot of SIGs. When I first did this for the first time, I did it by a SIG walkthrough, which was actually quite nice. This one is a SIG 229. Norinco NP34 is essentially a SIG 228 or 229. Not too much different. Alright, so got this nifty little tool. It's a cleaning tool, but on one end here it also has like a flathead screwdriver, standard screwdriver end. So that can be used for most of what I'm going to use it for now. So we'll start with the grips here. So once you have the grips off, then everything else just basically follows suit. Now I could speed this up, as I've already done it before, but if I speed this up, then things might get missed or questions might get asked and I'll have to do it again. So these grips come off in two parts. Simple enough. So that's one side. Now these Norincos are just as easy to work on as the SIGs are. And considering I was able to follow a SIG 228, 229 walkthrough for it, then it was pretty simple. You can also follow the same as a SIG 226 or 226X5. Basically, they're all the same gun. So now we have the frame. Pretty simple. Seems pretty easy. Now, I've only done this once before, but even so, I found it very easy. I'm not really mechanically inclined, but taking this apart is really quite simple to do, as long as you know what you're doing. Even if you're not mechanically inclined, like I am, it doesn't take much. I can replace the trigger on this without a single problem. So we'll start by, we can rotate this, which is the here's your takedown lever. Rotate it as you take it out, so you just kind of pull on it as you rotate it, and it comes out with relative ease. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult. Your takedown lever. Now with the takedown lever out, I'm going to take my tool that I have here again, and I can punch out, turn it around here so you can see it. There's the pin that holds in the trigger, so I can take that out, but instead of taking that out right away, I think I'll start on these springs. So these springs are quite easy to take out. You can do it with your hands. If you have a SIG tool, then I would suggest a SIG tool as well, but you don't necessarily need it. As long as you know exactly where in the firearm it's going. I'm trying to prop up my camera here. That's not really going to work. That's alright. So these springs are quite simple. They're a little bit more difficult to get back in than they are to take out. It took me a little while to kind of figure out how to put these springs back in. But this is for the decocking lever. Might be easier if I put a little tension on it. So there we go. I pushed down on the decocking lever a little bit, and that put a little bit of tension on the spring, so I was able just to take it out from there. So there's your decocking spring. Now from here, it's as simple as just lifting off your decocking lever. As long as you remember how everything goes back together, you're golden. Now from here, this pin can be pushed out, but instead of doing that, we're going to go to this little piece here, which is your slide lever. Now you can see as I pull up on the slide lever, that center block comes out with it as well. Now the center block is very simple to a SIG, to a SIG. You can see that spring came out with it. I'll try and keep this in frame here if I can. So you'll want to try and keep all those together. So when it comes to that, that's the center block. Now they call these a spring. It's not really a spring. It's more like just a cheap, flimsy piece of wire that you can, I'm sure, easily break with your fingers. So you really want to try to avoid that if all possible. You are going to need these. However, in this little packet here, I have two springs. One is the trigger bar spring, and the other one is, I believe, the spring that goes under the center block as well. So I have two extra springs that I can use just in case. So when you want to put this back together, I don't know how the lighting is in here, if you can see this, but there's a little hole right here. Now, in that hole is where your spring is going to sit. So it's got a little end on there. So that goes into the hole. Your spring comes up just like that on your center block. And that's what you want. Now it's going to want to fall freely anyways. But when you put this back in, it's actually pretty simple once you've done it a couple of times. I've done this particular piece twice now, so you get used to it. It's just something you kind of have to fiddle around with and eventually figure it out. A lot of times things just do tend to fall right back into their places. So we'll put that back with that. Okay, back to our frame. So from here, we can switch over to the other side. Now here we have the spring that goes to the trigger bar, which is very easy. I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this. The lighting here isn't very good, but there is a little piece, and I'll show you once it's out, in front of my finger there, where the spring sits, more like where the wire sits. So we'll start with that, and that is easily just taken out by your finger. Might take a little bit of working at it to get it where you want it, but it's fairly simple. There we go. So rotate that. So there's the spring. It'll sit back up like that, but there's another little notch in there that it has to sit in on the trigger bar. So we'll rotate this because it has a little bit of a, I guess you can call it almost like a flange or a little appendage, I guess, on this side. So it's got kind of this hook shape on the end. So you'll want to make sure that that goes into the proper space, which is right here. And it just kind of swings in. But that's where that goes. And I'll show you how to take out your trigger bar and where this sits in the trigger bar. So there's that spring. Alright, now we're ready for the trigger bar and the trigger assembly. Take your fancy little Norinco tool. Lack thereof fancy, I guess. Now what I did, if the camera catches this, you can see that there's a pinhole there right by the trigger. Now that's where this sits. You'll see it's got a notching in it, so you'll want to make sure that that notch is in the correct space. The flat end goes to the, I guess with me it would be to the left of the firearm. So whichever side that that your notching is for your tool is the way it'll want to go back into the firearm. So we'll set that aside here. So now everything in here can kind of move freely. So from here, we have this, your slide stop, and your trigger assembly. So you'll have the trigger bar. Trigger bar is relatively easy to take out. Pardon, my fingers are in the way here. Now you could take out the sear, the ejector. You could take out your hammer assembly if you want. I haven't done that yet. So it does take a little bit of maneuvering to get out the trigger bar. I fought with this for a few minutes last time. So bear with me a moment. Try and keep this in frame here as I do it. Now, this is not one of the easiest pieces to take out. Some guys that have been working on SIGs long enough, they're able to take these out within probably seconds, but as I say, I'm fairly new to this firearm, so I've only had it a year and I've never fully taken it down yet, so unfortunately, there's a little edge in here that it catches. You have to maneuver the trigger bar and the trigger bar back low. So these can take some time to take out. There we go. So here we have it. Oops. The trigger bar and the trigger. Pretty simple. And that goes back together just like that through the top hole. You don't want to use the bottom hole. That's for the other pin that holds everything together. So that's how the trigger bar and the trigger comes out. Can take some time, but it happens. So we'll set that aside. Now, if I want from here, I could take out my sear and ejector and the all the springs that hold that together. But not too sure I want to do that today. Just wanted to do kind of a basic takedown of a Norinco NP34. So you can see there's not much left to it. There's the hammer, there's the sear, the ejector, sear spring, and that's about all there is to it. Now on this one as well, if you wanted to, much like the SIGs, you could swap over your mag release. and it's no different than doing it in a SIG. If you flip over to the other side of the firearm, there's this little piece here, and if I move that, I can easily take that out. And there's also a little hole that's right here. I don't know how well you can see that. So much like the SIGs, you just press on that into that little hole there, and that's a spring that'll hold in your mag release. So if you want to do that, it's possible to even reverse your mag release on these guns. But I'm right-handed, so I prefer not to. So to put everything back together is just as simple. Just do the exact reverse as what you did to take it apart. Now I find that the trigger actually went in a lot easier than it came out. That seems to be the case, I guess, with some. A lot easier to put them in than it is to take them out. Lift the trigger bar. Okay. Now you'll see, I don't know how well you can see this, but I actually had to put the trigger in at a bit of an angle. Now from there, so here's the trigger bar spring, or the trigger bar, sorry, that's coming through the mag well. Now I had to take it out like that because that seems to be the way it wants to come out. So from here, basically just have to squeeze the trigger, push the trigger bar spring back up, or the trigger bar back up, and it should just fall into place for the most part. Which can be a bit of a pain still, but once you work at it. See if I can get this in the right spot here. Alright, I'll come back once I have this in. Alright, I'm back and got the trigger and the trigger bar in now. So it did go in with a little bit of trouble, but now that I managed to get her in there, I can get with the rest of the pistol here. So also I've employed the services of a desk lamp here, as where I'm sitting is a little bit dark, I guess, so I don't know how well the video picked up the rest. If it didn't pick up the rest of the video, I'd be more than happy to redo it. No problem. Let me know. So, now to reassemble your Norinco NP34. Trigger bar is in now. So with the trigger bar in, you'll see that there's a notch on it. See if I can use my tool here to kind of show you. But there's a notch right on the bottom of it, right here. It's kind of like a V-shaped notch right in the bottom of the trigger or the trigger bar. Keep wanting to say trigger spring, but right on the trigger bar here. So that's where the end of your trigger bar spring is going to sit. So when you put this in, make sure you put that in right. So when you want to put that in, you'll see there's two different ends. One is kind of a half hook shape, and the other one also has a kind of a smaller hook on it. So the smaller hook will go into a little hole here. So you put that in, give it kind of a light twist around. Now it takes a little bit of force to be able to get this spring where you want it. So I'm going to try and do this on camera here if I can. Try and get this in the shot. But what you'll need to do is you'll need to push on this spring. And unfortunately it just came out of alignment there. So this tends to happen. It can be a bit of a pain in the ass, but it happens. So I'll try and fix that here. Try and get that where it needs to be. Of course, it's never that easy with greasy hands. There we go. So it did take a little bit of work, but now you'll see that the trigger bar spring is now back in its rightful place. So trigger still floats, but once we put everything together, it'll all come together no problem. Okay, so next, now that the trigger bar spring is in, the trigger, swap over to the other side, and as I say, just do the reverse that you did when you put the gun together. So I'm going to hold it by the trigger here. Oh. Alright, I'm back. Just had to take a short break there. So anyways, back to where I was. So we got the trigger bar, we got the trigger in, the trigger bar spring. Now, what's left is the decocker, the slide stop, and basically the locking block, and to put the slide together. So it's basically all simple from here on out. So we'll start with, pardon me, just my dog in the background there. Decocking lever. Decocking lever goes right in there. Same place it used to sit there, so make sure that's in the same place. So from here, you're going to want the spring that holds that together, and this can be a bit of a pain in the ass to put in, but once you figure it out, it's not so bad. So we'll start with that. I'll try and hold that the best I can. Now if you look right on the decocker, there's a small hole there. Now that's where your spring has to sit. So, oh, you don't want to push out that back plate. There's also a little back plate in there. So you want to hold in that that back plate. There's the decocker. So there's also a little back plate in there as well that that comes out. So actually I'll take that out now. I know how it goes back in, so it's not too difficult to put it back in. So anyways, that back plate is this little piece here. So if you push that, you'll see that there's another part of it there that comes out. So that whole back plate does come out. So you want to make sure that that's in the correct spot. So when you want to put that spring on, your decocker, so you want to hold that back plate in if you can. your decocking lever back on. Now for the spring. Now the spring can be kind of a pain, but I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this, but I'll try and do this so you can. Now this end here will fit into that hole, and there's a little hook here that has to go basically around, and this is the hard part. It's got to sit in the groove for the decocker, so it's got to sit right in that groove, and this piece has to come around and sit right in that hole, so right there, but it can take some effort, and sometimes that happens. It can go flying. Bear with me a moment. Okay, so now that I found my spring, I can try this again here. So we'll see how well this works. So again, just to make sure you kind of got her here, the round piece with that, I guess you can call it a hook on the end, has to sit within this groove, which is the hard part. So I'm going to try and get that in now. You may have to even hold that with one hand if you can, and try and swing that spring around the other way. Which is, of course, not easy to do. Everything wants to fly apart. Now, I've tried putting the other end in first, but that doesn't seem to work too well. I found that, unfortunately, this is the best way. So let's see if I can use my tool here. I believe what I used last time to do this. Yeah. Yeah, now my back plate fell out. So I'll come back when I have this in. Okay, so it took a little bit of fighting, but I do have that spring in now. So now we're going to test that. So you can see that the decocking lever works just fine now. Now the hard part of that was trying to get, pardon my shake here, trying to get this part of the spring into, there's a little groove, you know, on this pin. And that's the hardest part, is trying to get the spring into that little groove. After that, once it's in there, and I used this little nifty tool to just move this spring back into position. So now that's there, I can put in the rest of the trigger assembly. So here's our lever, which is fairly simple to put in. Our slide release. So you can hold that in position. Make sure your trigger is in the right position as well. Now what I'd also suggest is, this is where your pin comes in. Now this is your pin that holds your trigger, your entire trigger assembly together. So if you can see this, the notched end is what you want facing into this side of the firearm. If you have it the other way around, then the notches might not line up. There's two notches in this. I don't know how well you can see that, but there's two little notches that are cut into this. Now, when those are in, and when they're in properly, it'll contact your center block. So what your center block is made to do is it's made to sit right on that pin. It's made to pivot on that pin. So this is what holds everything together. There's actually not much to a firearm once you kind of have everything figured out. Now, as you put everything together, you may have to move this this pin a little bit. You may have to turn it in either direction to help you line everything up. But I guess that's all in the fun of it. So now we'll put this piece in. Make sure that's lined up. Make sure your trigger is lined up. There we go. Now to test that, this is just kind of free floating at the moment, but it does sit true to where it was when I started. So that's good to go. So now what you may have to do is move your slide release right to the very edge. Sometimes it can move in either direction. So when you put in your center block, it might not sit where you want it to. Now your center block spring only goes in one way. A little hole there for the spring. So you set the spring in there. And it'll sit on the center block just like that. Now after doing this a couple times, I've noticed it does slide in quite easily, but you may have to work at it a little bit if you haven't done this before. So we'll try and slide this in. Now that spring might want to fall. And oftentimes it does. Now you'll see it's not quite going in the way I need it to. So this is where my tool comes in. Turn it around. Now I may have to turn this. So I'm going to turn that a little bit and see if that helps. Probably saw the locking block actually slide right into place there. And sometimes that's all it takes. You just put the center block in there, turn this little pin, and sometimes it'll just pop right back into place. So Oh, one thing I forgot, check the trigger bar. Now you'll notice that it doesn't really work because I don't have the locking, or the center block in. So now we'll put the main takedown lever in, which can be a bit of a pain in the ass, but you just have to twist it as you push it in. There you go, heard her click. There. Now that's in. Now you'll see that everything that's locked in, it works. So there we are. It's just kind of a quick and easy takedown. I will do another video later that takes down the hammer and the sear, ejector, and the rest of that. But for now, that's just a quick, easy, simple way of basically field stripping your Norinco or SIG, in this case Norinco. Magazine is easy. Floor plate. Push down on that spring with your tool. Give it a twist. And your floor plate slides right off. There's your spring. Now this here, this little piece here is what causes so many problems here in Canada. This longer section here is what stops us from using more than 10 rounds. In the States, these guns, most SIGs, I do believe, are between, I think it's 12 to 15 rounds. But here in Canada, only 10 because of that. So put it back in. They only go back in one way. A lot of pressure on that spring. Put your floor plate back on. You don't hold the spring here. So once you slide your floor plate back on, it's got a couple grooves there that it sits in. Test your plunger. You can see there on the bottom where it's pinned to 10 rounds. Otherwise, this would normally be a 15 round mag, but it's only pinned to 10. Just because of that little piece of shit lever in there. So that works. Now we'll put the grips back on, and then the slide. Pretty small screws. Unfortunately, here in Canada, it's just about impossible to get other things for your firearms, like grips, laser sights, that sort of thing. Seems a lot of businesses are getting out of that. Otherwise, I would like to have new grips for this. But SIG in the States will not ship to Canada. now that the grips are on, we'll put the slide back on. We'll test the slide stop. We'll test takedown lever. Make sure all that is good to go. Now, if anyone can tell me how to take apart a Norinco slide, that would be great. You see, there's a different system. If you look at a SIG, and if you look at the Norinco system here is quite a bit different. So I'm not too sure how to take that apart, but if anybody knows how, please let me know. Barrel. Slides right in. You'll notice it's not a threaded barrel either. Now, first time on a firearm that I've actually seen a braided recoil spring. A little bit different. Slide stop seems to work. Double action, single action works. And the decocker works. So that's it. Simple takedown of a Norinco NP34, which is SIG 228229 clone.